Here are 4 pictures of templates that the best vanilla players use. Can you see what these templates have in common? That's right, they don't have any line artillery. If you guessed that they were designed by sweaty nerds, you are also correct. Now let's start on the why. The first problem with line artillery is that it takes up 3 combat width. This means that you can lose perspective on how bad line artillery actually is compared to other types of battalions. When you look at the technology itself, you might think that this is 30 soft attack, while for example, this very cheap infantry tank design is 35 soft attack, that these might be equal. But this not only has 5 more soft attack, it also has 50% more than that per combat width. This means that the best way to actually compare line artillery with other types of battalions is by multiplying the other types by 1.5. This is to proper scale it so it actually becomes accurate. If line artillery would be 2 combat width or maybe even 1 combat width, it might be more viable. There are other mods that have 1 or 2 combat width artillery, where artillery is much more balanced and much more useful. Although these mods do balance a lot more than just artillery, so it might not necessarily be just the combat width, that is the reason why artillery is good in those other mods. And another problem with line artillery having 3 combat width is that support artillery becomes so much stronger compared to line artillery. Support artillery has 60% of the stats, while having a third of the cost and 0 of the combat width that line artillery has. This is the reason why if you ever have a choice between support artillery and line artillery, that you should always pick support artillery. The second problem with artillery is the different increases between the technologies. Let's first look at infantry equipment. This is the stats of each infantry battalion. You will see that the first Guns 1 has 6 soft attack, the second has 9, the last has 12. The increase from the first to the second is 3, meaning 50% here. And from the second to the third, it's another 3, which is here 33% more stats. So first 50% and then 33. If we go over to artillery, we will see that the first artillery to the second is 25 to 30, which is a 20% increase. The second to the third is another 13% increase. So this means that early on in the game, line artillery is relatively a lot better than infantry battalions, meaning that early on, before you get Guns 2, it might actually be worth it to do line artillery. But the problem is that you should probably get this pretty early, at least before 1939, which is probably before you get into a lot of wars, meaning that line artillery is actually not that useful anymore. This is also part of the reason why gun research is so incredibly important, while artillery research is not. I've made another spreadsheet right here with 1942 level tech, GBP left, all of the marine doctrine, and some of the basic MIOs you would probably get, with the same support companies and same division templates. Now this is with the generals as well. Now what we do see here is that the maximum damage per width only goes down when you add each line artillery piece. There is no increase from 9.0 to a 9.1. And when you look at the Marines, it becomes even worse. Like, it's a huge fall when adding a piece of line artillery, as well as it's a soft attack per width being even lower. The last major problem of line artillery is that when you have a division like this one, which is a 9.3, a very popular infantry division, is that it contains such a high percentage of artillery. What this does is that it changes the composition, and this changes how much of each type of bonus the division receives. So this division has 75% infantry in the composition. This means that advisors, like the infantry advisor, the 10% attack and the 15% defense, you only get 75% of that bonus. Now you might think that that's a pretty small change, going from 10 to 7.5% is a pretty small change, but this effect here also counts for all generals and field marshals. This means that as well as the 2.5% attack here, you do another 2%, you lose another 2.5% on the general and another 1.25% on the field marshal, since it's half. Now this is more than 5% attack and even more than that in defense. Now, you might argue that, oh, you can just do the artillery advisor instead to make up for the lack in stats of only having the infantry expert, but there are a couple of problems with that. First is that it's a bit harder to get. Most countries start with the infantry advisor, and I rarely see people actually get the artillery advisor, especially grind for it. I doubt that more than 1% of people who regularly use line artillery actually try to grind for an artillery expert. But then again, it's pretty hard to get because you do need the engineer trait. And you do need a general that's high enough level. While the infantry leader is a lot easier because you can usually just get it on a general that you frequently use. And also, as well as the artillery expert, you can't actually have an advisor with an artillery trait. It does not exist. Wojtek doesn't count. And even worse is when you are using special forces like Marines. With special forces, you can get the commando advisors, which is another 10% attack. And again, if you add a little more line artillery, you get less of this bonus. So this stacks with the infantry attack, meaning you get 20%, but if this was a 9-3 per se, then it would only get 15% of that same attack. Now I've made this chart here of all of the different division designs, both with generals and without generals, and these all include having infantry advisor. Well, the commando here is also with the commando advisor. Now this is very similar to the one I created in the previous video, but the difference here is I try to take these inside the battle to have more real results. This is also without any penalty, so I try to still keep it as pure as possible. And it's also slightly inaccurate because equipment works in a pretty weird way, but it's still pretty close to reality. And we see here pretty much the same as the last video, where it is an increase from a 9-0 to 9-1, very small increase from a 9-1 to 9-2, and a decrease from 9-2 to a 9-3. And you also see that a Marine has even more max damage. From a 9-1 to a 9-2 is even smaller than if it was infantry. And with the commando expert, it's even smaller. This also does not account for the other bonuses that Marines do get. Now, I have researched like the very basic Marine tech, but when you do get even more Marine bonuses, and especially when you consider river bonuses and amphibious bonuses that artillery doesn't give, it's never worth it to have line artillery in a special forces template. Now, with having generals, this means both a general with infantry leader and a field marshal with infantry leader. You see the max damage first goes up, the same as without the generals, but it goes down from 9-1 to 9-2, meaning that even a 9-2 is not worth it. And then from a 9-2 to 9-3, it's a pretty huge decrease. With Marines, it's a pretty small increase, and with the commando as well, the increase is almost completely negligible. Another issue with line artillery is that you don't really get any bonuses from the doctrine. Now, you might think that superior firepower does give a lot of artillery bonuses, but you are actually mistaken. The bonuses you do get is mostly from these two, which both give bonuses to support companies, which does count for support artillery, but doesn't count as line artillery. Even this one, all frontline battalions, does not actually buff line artillery at all. And as you probably know, you should not do this path because it's just so much worse. If you actually do line artillery, the best path for line artillery is actually Grand Battle Plan. But even in GBP, you don't get any real bonuses to your artillery, and you mostly get to infantry as well. Last issue with line artillery is that it doesn't actually fit into the advanced meta. So with multiplayer games and meta games, you will see a lot of infantry that are really empty and really cheap. This is because the point in the multiplayer games is not for artillery to be pushers, but just an org wall, meaning they're just there to absorb damage. You could maybe argue that if line artillery would be stronger, that there would be more of a point in having line artillery, because then you would face more line artillery, but that isn't currently the case. This is also the reason why mass assault is so good, is because you don't care about the infantry being able to push really well, you just care about them holding. Another thing is that there are some more like complicated formulas where you, for example, take organization multiplied by soft attack divided by IC squared. I believe this is the best formula for divisions if you don't have enough to fill the combat with. But again, this is more specific, very advanced, and most of you don't really need to know it. But the point here is that with this formula, you will see that artillery performs even worse. Another reason why most meta players don't use line artillery at all is because of the additional cost that the line artillery brings could be used on more useful stuff. So both tanks and air are much more important to your victory than the artillery is. Also, having a bunch of these divisions that have like a weak attack but still better than nothing while costing a lot more isn't necessarily beneficial, just because these are probably still not strong enough to push enemy divisions. You would probably need a lot more, so adding the extra line artillery doesn't really do enough either. I know a lot of people have suggested that line artillery is still good because you can maybe crit your enemy, but there are a couple of problems with this. The first is that yes, the soft attack per width does go up, does increase, but usually it's actually not enough. In single player it's probably enough, but the problem is there are way better strategies even in single player. So here I've created a lot of different examples of what you can do. So we can first see here, I've made a very simple Space Marine, which is 9 infantry battalions and 1 medium tank, and compared it to the 9-2 and the 9-3, same template otherwise. You see the soft attack is really similar between the Space Marine and the 9-2, while it's slightly worse than the 9-3. And then with the buffs, it's even more, it's almost completely equal to the 9-2 and only slightly worse to the 9-3. And this is without accounting for the several other buffs that Space Marines do give, like the extra armor, which both gives plus 40% organization damage and means you take 50% less damage. Another division that outperforms the line artillery versions is the 6-0. This is a very simple 12 width infantry division that only has 6 infantry battalions, but what it does have is it has both support artillery and rocket artillery. It also uses superior firepower to best take advantage of the bonuses to support companies. So this division right here has higher soft attack per width than both the 9-3 with superior firepower, with the rocket artillery and superior firepower, and with GBP. And this does not even account for the extra buffs that you do get from the advisor or from the generals. Also, the 6-0 has higher org as well as having the significantly higher soft attack per width, meaning that the 6-0 does significantly outperform the 9-3 in almost every way. The only real issue is the cost and the losses, but you face the exact same issue with the 9-3. So the 6-0 is just a better choice. The 6-0 is also my preferred choice for example, Marines when playing single player. This is because they are really small and easy to handle, as well as having a really high soft attack. Another thing I've noticed a lot of people mention when they talk about the extra soft attack per width they get from adding more line artillery is the fact that they can reinforce meme their enemy faster. Now there is some truth to that, but another problem with this is that yes, you can reinforce meme your enemy faster, but since you sacrifice organization to get this higher level of soft attack, you also can get reinforced memed yourself faster, meaning it doesn't always help. Also, the difference is usually not that large and doesn't always really help you. Tanks are much more efficient if you want to reinforce meme your enemy. Also, in this image here, you can see the defense of an 18 width. Now, this defense isn't actually enough to stop a 9-3, where I've calculated that it will receive about 683 attack. So it will get critted, and even more accounting for the different generals, which I have on the defender side. But again, this is without MIO, without entrenchment, and basically with optimal conditions. Whereas in reality, attack is probably a bit lower than the defense, because tactics always hurt the attack and not the defense. Of course, there are a lot of things you have to consider here, so this is not completely static. You have to consider air, both the ground support bonus and the air superiority debuff. And also force attack and last stand also has a significant impact. Either way, I wouldn't recommend any line artillery at all, just because even though this would crit a 9-0, in a multiplayer game, you're not actually facing 9-0, you're facing tanks and a lot of other stuff, which a 9-3 is not capable enough of doing. And if you're playing single player, other alternatives such as a 6-0 with rocket artillery, support artillery, or a space marine is probably a lot stronger. I've made these templates here if you want to look at the design. It's pretty much exactly the same as I explained, but what you do need to remember if you want to do this is that the 6-0 completely relies on the superior firepower doctrine, these two especially, while the Space Marine relies on a somewhat decent medium tank template. Now I'm just using this design, but you can use different variations of this, and especially when you do get a better MIO, this becomes even cheaper. Again, the point of view is not to copy exact, I'm just showing it to you as an example, so it is more important to learn why rather than what. I would love to have a discussion with almost anyone about this topic, because it's such an important topic that a lot of people don't know. If you still don't believe me that line artillery is so completely overpowered, you can just go to some of the best multiplayer discords and ask a couple questions there, and I think they would explain it even further than I already did. If you want more of this type of content, please do subscribe. I will try to make more videos. See you guys.